The stone walls are slick with moisture. Your breath comes shallow in the suffocating darkness, and above you, so far above, it feels like another world. The roar of 50,000 voices shakes dust from the ceiling. You are not a gladiator. You are not a criminal. You are a prize. And in the cell next to yours, iron hinges groan as a door opens. This is Rome, 79 A.D. The Colosseum has been standing for less than a year, its marble still gleaming, its underground chambers still reeking of fresh mortar and old blood. And in those chambers, beneath the spectacle of combat and the theater of death, another ritual unfolds, one that Roman senators will later refuse to name directly, one that historians will argue about in footnotes, their language deliberately vague, one that makes even the most hardened scholars pause before writing the next sentence. Her name was Sabina. She was 18 years old. She was Dacian nobility. And 3 hours ago, she watched a gladiator named Gaius Valerius Maximus kill the last surviving warrior from her homeland. Now she waits to discover what victory entitles him to claim. Before we descend into those chambers, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching this from. It never ceases to amaze me how a story buried for 2 millennia can suddenly matter to people across every continent. The archaeological evidence for what happened next comes from 3 sources that align with disturbing precision. First, the excavations of 2018 beneath the Colosseum's eastern hypogeum, where Dr. Isabella Fortunato's team uncovered a series of small stone rooms with drainage channels carved into the floors and iron rings embedded in the walls. Second, fragmentary records from Cassius Dio's later writings, passages so carefully worded they read like legal disclaimers. Third, a Senate decree from October 79 A.D., catalog number VAT.Lot.3844, discovered in the Vatican archives in 1987, which addresses certain customary practices regarding the allocation of female captives following arena victories. The Romans didn't hide this practice because they were ashamed. They hid it because it was beginning to cause revolts. To understand what Sabina faced in that cell, you need to understand what the arena rewarded. Roman society built itself on a hierarchy of dominance, so absolute that every institution reinforced it. Conquered peoples weren't simply defeated, they were absorbed, their symbols broken, their gods renamed, their women redistributed. The arena was where this philosophy became theater. Gladiators fought for freedom, for glory, for survival, but they also fought for spoils. The most valuable spoil wasn't gold. It was a human being who had lost the right to say no. The system was called Victoria Carnalis, the carnal privilege of victory. After a gladiator won a significant bout, especially during games celebrating a military triumph, he was granted first selection among the female captives held beneath the arena. This wasn't a reward whispered about in shame. It was official policy, recorded in arena ledgers, supervised by guards, and allocated with the same bureaucratic efficiency Rome applied to grain distribution and tax collection. Gaius had killed 18 men in sanctioned combat over 14 years. He'd been enslaved at age 12 when his father died in a debtor's prison. His body was a map of near Mysisa's scar across his ribs, where a trident had slipped past his guard. Another, along his shoulder, where a Germanic axe had bit through leather and muscle, but somehow missed bone. His dream was simple: earn the rudies, the wooden sword of freedom, and disappear into a life where no one knew his name. His nightmare was dying anonymously, dragged off the sand by meat hooks, while the crowd cheered for the next bout. But on this August afternoon, everything changed. He'd defeated the Dacian Champiano warrior named Decebalus, cousin to their recently executed king in front of Emperor Titus himself. The crowd had chanted his name for 7 full minutes. He was granted 500 denarii, a laurel wreath, still damp with oil, and the right to choose among 17 Dacian women being held in the western cell block. Sabina was among them. She had been engaged to a warrior named Dear Panius before Rome burned her village to ash. He'd died 3 months earlier, killed by Roman auxiliaries during a failed ambush. Now she wore the plain tunic of the condemned, her hair still smelling of smoke from the fires that had taken everything. She wanted nothing except the dignity of dying without being made a spectacle. What terrified her most wasn't death, it was becoming entertainment one more time for the empire that had already stolen her entire world. The preparation began at noon. Guards entered the women's holding area with buckets of water and coarse soap. The captives were scrubbed down, their hair combed through, their torn garments replaced with cleaner tunics. An older woman, a priestess named Zelmoxis, who had once served the Dacian sun, temples whispered the truth they all feared. They're making us presentable, either for the crowd or for what comes after. Sabina understood. Rome didn't just conquer demonstrated conquest. Humiliation was part of the strategy. Above them, the afternoon spectacle was being prepared. Between major gladiatorial matches, arena officials staged what they politely called mythological interludes, reenactments, where condemned prisoners played roles in legends that always ended in real death. Today's performance had been designed specifically to celebrate Rome's victory over the Dacian rebellion. 20 women would be lifted to the arena floor, given wooden practice swords, and forced to fight each other in pairs. The winners would be claimed by Rome's champions. The losers would be executed on the spot. When the elevator platform rose and sunlight hit her face, Sabina heard the sound before she could process the sight. 50,000 voices, a single organism of noise that vibrated through her chest. The smell was overwhelming: roasted meat from vendors, perfume from the wealthy sections, and underneath it all, the iron stink of dried blood baking on hot sand. Across from her stood Chronicles Dearpanius' sister, the woman who had taught Sabina to weave, who had sung at her engagement ceremony. Their eyes met. The wooden swords were placed in their hands. The master of games raised his arm, dropped it. Neither woman moved. For 90 seconds, the greatest empire on earth was defied by 2 unarmed women standing still in the sand. The crowd's cheers turned to confusion, then to rage. Food scraps and olive pits began to rain down. Guards rushed forward. Chronicles was struck from behind with the flat of a blade and collapsed. Sabina screamed and dropped her sword, rushing toward her. Both were dragged back beneath the arena. But they had done something Rome couldn't tolerate. They had refused to perform. The chambers beneath the Colosseum weren't improvised. They were designed, small stone rooms, each about 8 feet by 10, with benches built into the walls and doors that locked only from the outside. They were clean. They were organized. And that was the most horrifying thing about them. This wasn't chaos or spontaneous cruelty. This was infrastructure. At 4 in the afternoon, the door to Sabina's chamber opened. Gaius Valerius Maximus stepped inside. He still wore his arena harness, leather straps dark with sweat and someone else's blood. She was backed against the far wall, exhausted beyond fear. Between them stood the full weight of Roman law. He had complete legal authority. She had none. According to every statute, every custom, every precedency was property earned through violence. History doesn't record what Gaius thought in that moment. We don't have his journal. We don't have his testimony. All we have is what happened next. preserved in a bureaucratic report filed 3 days later by an arena clerk who noted an irregularity in standard allocation procedure. Gaius removed his helmet, set his sword against the wall, and sat down on the bench with his head in his hands. 5 minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Finally, in broken Dacian language he'd picked up from other captives over the years, he asked, "What was his name?" whose Sabina's voice came out as barely a whisper. "The man they made you watch die." She didn't answer immediately. Then Diopanius Gaius nodded slowly. "I killed a man named Diopanius today. Same family name. Could have been a cousin. Your people use it often." What followed wasn't what Rome expected. It was a conversation. Two people the empire had tried to strip of every shred of humanity, sitting in a stone room beneath the world's most magnificent stadium, talking about the people they'd lost. Gaius told her about his father, hanged in a debtor's prison when he was 9. Sabina described watching her village burn. 2 hours passed. Guards checked twice, heard voices, assumed compliance, and moved on. At 6 in the evening, Gaius Valerius Maximus made the decision that would eventually reach the Senate floor. He stood, walked to the door, and called for the guard. "This woman is ill," he said flatly. "Infected. I refuse the allocation. Send her to the physician." It was the only loophole the system allowed. If a captive was declared diseased, a gladiator could legally reject her and return her to general prisoner status. The lie was transparent. The guard recognized it instantly. But Roman bureaucracy operated on rigid procedure. Challenging a gladiator's choice meant paperwork, witnesses, and inquiry. Accepting it took seconds. Sabina was removed, taken to the medical holding area. She died there 3 days later from an infection, the most common killer in Roman captivity. The medical quarters were overcrowded, filthy, and staffed by slaves who had learned not to care. The mercy that spared her from one horror delivered her directly into another. Gaius never saw her again. He fought twice more that month, won both times, and refused his rewards both times. Word spread through the gladiatorial barracks like fever. Maximus had gone soft. Maximus had been cursed. Maximus had converted to one of those strange Eastern cults. The rumors multiplied, but the truth was simpler and far more dangerous to Rome's social order. He had remembered what it meant to be human. On September 15th, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Senecio stood before the Roman Senate with a formal complaint. His nephew, a junior gladiator, had been beaten by his trainer for refusing the customary reward after victory. The nephew claimed Maximus's example had inspired him. It was a trivial case until it forced Rome's most powerful men to publicly acknowledge a practice everyone knew existed, but no one ever spoke about. The Senate debate lasted for hours. Conservative senators invoked tradition. Our ancestors conquered holy body and spirit. This forged our greatness. Traumatized survivors carry memories that fuel uprisings for generations. But the real trigger wasn't morality. It was 3 provincial governors reporting that Rome's treatment of captive women had become recruitment propaganda for rebel movements. The empire wasn't intimidating its enemies anymore. It was radicalizing them. On October 1st, 79 AD, the Senate passed what historians later called the lex captiva, the law of captive women. Its terms were limited but unprecedented. Female prisoners of war could not be distributed as public rewards in the arena. The theatrical showcase was outlawed. Private exploitation continued. The law didn't free anyone. It only removed the audience. 3 months later, Gaius earned his freedom not for kindness, but for winning 5 consecutive bouts, his last recorded act as a free man was purchasing the freedom of a Dacian woman named Kamosicus. The archives give only her name. Historians strongly suspect she was the same woman who stood beside Sabina in the sand. 1 act of defiance. 2 women. One lived a handful of extra days. The other survived to see freedom. It changed nothing. The machine was too vast, too profitable, too deeply woven into Roman culture. When Dr. Fortunato's team uncovered those chambers in 2018, they found more than architecture. They found scratches carved into stone, desperate marks left by hands that wanted to prove they had existed. They found 6 bronze identification tags stamped with the word Captiva and dates spanning 79 to 82 AD. They found drainage channels built with the same engineering precision Rome used for its aqueducts. What disturbs us most isn't that Rome was cruel. Cruelty defined ancient warfare. What disturbs us is that Rome industrialized it, turned it into bureaucracy, built rooms for it, trained guards to supervise it, filed reports about it, made it so routine that it required a law to stop, and even then, only the public version ended. The line between civilization and barbarism has never been measured by marble temples or paved roads. It's measured by how a society treats those who have no power to resist. Rome engineered aqueducts that still stand after 2,000 years. At the same time, it built chambers beneath its greatest monument, where human beings were violated as casually as stage props. Its brilliance and its moral emptiness existed side by side without contradiction. Sabina died of an infection in a cramped cell beneath the grandest structure of her time. Did she wonder if anyone would remember her name? Did she imagine that 2 millennia later, archaeologists might uncover her identification tag and speak it aloud again? The blood on the arena sand wasn't always from combat. Sometimes it came from innocence turned spectacle, from power without restraint, from the moments when civilization looked away while cruelty received applause. And somewhere in the ruins, beneath layers of earth and time and carefully constructed myth, the truth waits in scratches on stone proof that even when empires tried to erase them, some people refused to disappear without leaving a mark.